On Monday, Francisco Alvarez said the New York Mets have the best lineup in baseball. While it might sound ambitious, if Alvarez has a breakout season, he just might be right.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app or at FanDuel.com to get started. Well, spring training is basically here. You have a lot of guys that are already reporting to camp. We heard from Ryan Stanek today. We heard from Francisco Alvarez. We're going to talk about Brandon Nimmo, Clay Holmes. A lot of guys talking to the media. And with that, you get some buzzworthy quotes. And one from Francisco Alvarez really stood out and got a lot of attention. Here's what Alvarez had to say about the New York Mets lineup this year.
Pete Alonso back too. What do you think of what this lineup can do top to bottom now?
I think it's going to be a great lineup. I think we are the best lineup in the whole baseball. It's a great thing. We have speed, we have fight beat and everything. We have power, we have hitting guys, we have power hitters, we have everything. So I think we are the best lineup in baseball. So we can fight with any team.
They can fight with any team. I would expect nothing less from a guy who has the best tattooed on his neck in red ink than to come out and have an ambitious take like that. Francisco Alvarez is a very confident player. And I was talking about that too on his neck, dating back to when he was a prospect. I remember seeing it for the first time. I'm like, did he really have the gall? Did he really have the stones to put the best right here across his throat in red ink? And he does. And he is a guy that has the potential to be the best catcher in baseball. I've been saying that on this show for years now. Now, that is a high bar to get to. William Contreras is coming off an outstanding season. Cal Raleigh is pretty much guaranteed to hit 30 home runs and be one of the best defensive catchers in baseball year in and year out. So those lofty expectations are one that Alvarez may never reach or may take him years to get there. He's still only 23 years old. With that said, when you talk about the players in this lineup, I think Francisco Alvarez has the most ability to raise the ceiling of this team. And the reason why I say he has that ability compared to other hitters is because you know what you're going to get with Juan Soto. Now, Juan Soto, when you're just talking about impact, is obviously going to be the driving force for this lineup. He's going to be the engine. Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor, Mark Vientos, Brandon Nimmo, all of those guys that we talked about on yesterday's show when I was building out my ideal Mets lineup, they are the ones that are going to make or break this team in a lot of ways. They're the ones that set the floor. But a guy like Francisco Alvarez has the chance to put you over the top. Because if Francisco Alvarez finally realizes his potential, all of a sudden that 1 through 5 goes to a 1 through 6. And you were talking about immense power in this lineup. We wrote an article over at Just Baseball. Leo Morgenstern, one of our best writers, he's my right-hand man on the editorial staff. He wrote an article as part of our breakout series about Francisco Alvarez. And I was curious to get an outsider's perspective on Alvarez's potential and if he can get to it. And I think the article really touches on a lot of interesting things. The first one is establishing the baseline of why Francisco Alvarez is a top 10 catcher in baseball. We ranked him at number 10 at Just Baseball. But what Leo cites in this article is he talks about Patrick Bailey, who was ranked number 5 on our list of the top 10 catchers in the game, despite the fact that he has a career 640 OPS. Why is that, Leo says? Because he's miles ahead of every other backstop when it comes to earning extra strikes, a stat that is very important in the game today. And when you talk about Francisco Alvarez, that is the one thing defensively he does very well. And because of that, if you look at what Fangraphs ranks when it comes to top defenders in baseball, they have Alvarez over the last 2 seasons as the 12th most valuable defender in the game at any position. That's including all those shortstops and center fielders that rack up the defensive metrics. So right there, we already know that Francisco Alvarez is going to be an above average player for the New York Mets. There's no doubt about it. But there is still that potential he hasn't realized as a hitter. Last year, he was a little bit better than league average when you look at his WRC plus. That's weighted runs created plus, a stat that measures hitters on a league average of 100. This is an all-encompassing stat that tells us hitter value. And a 102 WRC plus means he was slightly better than your league average hitter. I think he had a 97 WRC plus in 2023, but it felt like a more impactful season because he hit 25 bombs. Last year, he was able to hit for a higher average, get on base at a better clip, but he only hit 11 home runs. So finding that ability to continue to improve with the average, with the on-base percentage, but get back to 25 to 30 homers, that's going to take Alvarez from number 10 as far as the top 10 catchers in baseball and skyrocket him into the top 5. He has that potential if you go back to when he was a prospect. Leo notes this in the article. There was a lot of prospect evaluators that were sky high on him. Arm Layton for Us at Just Baseball said when he was a prospect that his offensive upside rivaled any prospect at any position. Baseball Prospectus called him the best offensive catcher in recent memory, the best offensive catching prospect in recent memory. And Baseball America proposed that he would hit in the middle of the Mets order for a long time. Now, one of the interesting notes that Leo puts in this article, he talks about the streakiness of Francisco Alvarez, how in May he had a 175 WRC plus. In July, this was in 2023, mind you. In May of 2023, he had a 175 WRC plus. July, he had a 162 WRC plus. Last year, leading up to the All-Star game in June, he had a 194 WRC plus, or pre-All-Star break from June up until the break. And then coming out of it, he struggled. Then in September, he had a 150 WRC plus. The problem, as Leo notes here, is if you look at what he did from the All-Star break through the end of August last year, he hit 150 with a 195 on base, a 224 slug. That was a 20 WRC plus in 34 games. He was absolutely brutal. Brutal. He didn't barrel up the baseball, and he struck out more than 30% of the time. And so what Leo talks about in the article is that the difference from Francisco Alvarez becoming one of the best offensive catchers in baseball, it's getting to a point where he rides those streaks, but when he's not on a hot streak, he gets that baseline up to more league average, and he's not terrible when he's not hot. If he can fix that, Francisco Alvarez could boon this year and really become an all-star and a staple in the middle of the Mets lineup like he was always promised to be. But we've seen a couple seasons where he hasn't put it all together. Why is this year the year? I think some of the things that Alvarez said today, some of the things we can note by looking at a swing change and some mindset concerns or questions in the past that he might have corrected could get this guy to the levels we've always hoped. I want to go through all of that in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off, you might want to get in on that fourth quarter comeback. You can stay in on the action if you're looking for a bigger payout. You can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because you might look at a team that's down big at the half but has the ability to come back, look at their money line and say, well, if the Warriors are going to come back in this game, Steph Curry is going to get over his point total. And so let's take this money line and let's take Steph's points. And if those things come together, all of a sudden you are winning big on that same game parlay. Plus the app is super easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. So right now, new FanDuel customers should get in on the action because they're going to get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. you're following on YouTube today, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers. Appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. What will be the difference between Francisco Alvarez this year and in years past? One of the things he talked about a lot today was his mindset, the mental side of the game. He's working on being positive every day, focusing on his routine, not letting himself get down, just trying to stay even keel. I think when you look at a young player who sets incredible expectations on themselves, if they aren't meeting those expectations, they can get disappointed, they can press, they can really struggle. I think that has been part of why Alvarez has had such a hot or cold run throughout the big leagues so far, because when he gets into his zone and he was really showcasing the player he can be, the game becomes easy for him. But then once the scouting report changes on him and teams start to adjust and they start pitching to his weaknesses and he's really having a tough time of it, it's tough to climb out of those struggles. And I think if you look at Mark Vientos and his progression last year, I really think there is a blueprint that has been laid for Francisco Alvarez. And it's just getting yourself in better at-bats, better counts, putting yourself in a position to succeed. When Vientos struggled last year, he was able to snap out of it quickly because he continued to put himself in a good position. And eventually, that talent was going to shine through. The same thing is true with Alvarez. And I think you can look at his walk rate, how it coincides with his strikeout rate, and get a clear picture of what this guy has to do. Because if you look at what he did in the minor leagues, every single level, walk rate's well above 10%. You average out his career in the minor leagues, his career walk rate was 13.6% of the time in the minors. Compare that to the big leagues. The best two offensive catchers in baseball last year, William Contreras and Cal Raleigh, they both walked over 11% of the time. Those high walk rates are going to keep your baseline so much higher. Because just imagine if you walk 5% of the time. Across 20 at-bats, you're only walking one time. You walk 10% of the time. Across those 20 at-bats, you have two walks. Every 10 at-bats, you're getting on base one time. You get a couple of hits, you're already getting on base at a 300 clip. And you look at when Alvarez struggles, all of a sudden that on-base percentage starts dipping closer to 200. So now if you're at least just getting on base and keeping your head above water 300% of the time, or 30% of the time, you're getting on base at a 300 clip, then all of a sudden, if one of those two hits was a home run, your numbers are pretty solid, even if you're not feeling your best at the plate. So getting that walk is important because it also just sets you up for success in every at-bat. If you are in position to walk over 10% of the time, all of a sudden you're getting into more 3-1 counts, 3-2 counts where you're going to get that fastball. We talked about that with Mark Vientos a bit on yesterday's show. I said that I think Vientos should bat second because if he has Juan Soto hitting behind him third, he's going to see more fastballs. If you want to get my full take on that, go back and listen or watch yesterday's show. But I think the point stands with Alvarez as well. Not necessarily the protection side of it, getting to those fastballs, but getting himself in better counts. He's going to see that pitch that he thrives on, which is the fastball. In 2023, he hit 214 on the fastballs. And that's not great, but it was his best mark on any pitch, and he slugged 487 on them. He had, I think, 15 of his 25 home runs on fastballs. Now you look at what he did last year, he hit 311 on fastballs, slugged at a 527 clip on fastballs. So getting as many fastballs as possible, similar to what Mark Vientos has to do, that's where you're going to see the most success out of Alvarez, getting in those counts where you're going to see fastballs. His walk rate's not bad, 8% in 2023, 8.8% last year. But again, if you look at the splits per month, the walk rate coincides with his struggles or his successes. If you look at March last year, March and April, his walk rate was 6.8%, OPS 652. You look at June, OPS over 1,000, 1.123, walk rate of 14%. OPS falls off to 577 in July, walk rate 6.6%. So again, low walk rate, low OPS. August, walk rate drops to 5%, OPS 449. Now, his strikeout rate in both July and August was over 30% each month. You go to September, walk rate climbs back up to 12.9%. Strikeout rate drops to 21.4%. OPS spikes up to 900. And he tapped into more power again. So if you look at Francisco Alvarez, what he has to get more consistent on is his walk rate, because that's going to trickle down to every other facet of his offensive game. If his great months, he's walking 13, 14% of the time. His down months, he's walking 9% of the time. He's meeting somewhere in the middle where his walk rate's at 11, 12%. All of a sudden, you're going to see a hitter that can get on base at a 330, 340 clip, even 350 at his absolute best. By getting in better accounts, I think his average is just going to naturally tick up as well. And also, you're going to get into those fastball counts where he can do damage and he can ambush and get some more home runs. I think the other big thing that we can see from Francisco Alvarez is the swing change. I think the mental side of the game is going to help with keeping himself even keeled, hopefully just trusting his ability, because his ability in the box really is a disciplined hitter. And I think that foundation is going to put him in a lot of good spots. But I also think an adjustment to his swing might help him be more athletic in the box and could help him really just react a lot better. Because if you look at the hitter Alvarez was early in his career so far, he is very sort of rigid in his approach because he is slightly open and a lot of weight does he put on his back leg. Now, what does this allow Alvarez to do? As a guy that has tree trunks for legs, it allows him to really fire that lower half and explode on the baseball. That's great. The problem when you are going with that open stance, the toe tap, and really being leaned back and really cocked back in your approach is you're sort of stiff, you're sort of rigid. You're not able to really trust your hands. You're not able to react as well. And at times, you can end up late, particularly on fastballs. A big change that we saw throughout the season last year was just him consistently trying to shorten up, get himself in a position where he could get to those fastballs. And it worked in September. He started hitting some home runs. He started having a lot more success. Now we're looking at a complete swing change, though, because Alvarez isn't leaned back on that back half of his body. He's not putting all of his weight on his back foot. Now he still is going to get into his backside a little bit, but he is much more upright. He's not, sitting with a bent knee. He's standing more upright. His new swing is more comparable. We've seen some people pointing this out. It looks like a Miguel Cabrera or a JD Martinez, where he has the ability with his strength. He doesn't need to generate that extra torque by getting into his lower half as much. He can still get into his legs when he swings the bat, but by being a little more upright, he's a little more loose in the box, I think. And that's going to give him the ability to react a little bit better to the breaking ball that he might not read right away, but then he might be able to fight off that pitch and stay in at bat. And then a couple pitches later, you might see the fastball. It also should help him stay on top of the fastball, not have it beat him as much, not be late to it. If the swing is, something that he could feel comfortable at, because ultimately hitters are, used to the swing that got them to the show. Francisco Alvarez has set himself up a certain way in the box his entire career. He always has that setup where he is, lower to the ground, bent knee, really shifting all that weight to his back foot. Now it is a very big change, but if he can get comfortable with it, he has all the athleticism in the world to rely on his hands more and his upper body more to generate some of that power. I think you're going to see a more complete hitter this year if this swing is one that he really can get comfortable with. If he's not comfortable, you want to go back to where you're comfortable ultimately. The last thing you want is to be trying a swing change and you're just never feeling right in the box. But if this change is one that he can stick to and he can stay with this approach, I think you're just going to see a guy that's going to have a lot more fluidity in the box, because he also was going with the toe tap. Now it's more of a slight leg kick where he's kind of, lunging his weight forward. So he's coming to the ball more instead of having the ball come to him and he's waiting back on it. So I think this swing change has the potential to bear a lot of fruit for Francisco Alvarez, because he is so talented. He's so gifted. He's so intelligent. If he gets himself to a point where the mental side of the game is really steady, where he is even keeled, even when he struggles, and he's able to continuously put himself in good counts, that natural ability is going to shine through, and you are going to see one of the best offensive catchers in baseball. And with that, the Mets lineup completely changes. I want to talk about what Alvarez said. Can the Mets have the best lineup in baseball? If he's right, I certainly think they can. I want to go through that a little bit in the next segment. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. If you're an everyday listener of the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. On yesterday's show, I broke down my ideal lineup for the Mets. I had Francisco Lindor batting leadoff, Mark Vientos second, Juan Soto third, Pete Alonso fourth, and Brandon Nimmo fifth. If you're curious about why I had Vientos ahead of Juan Soto, you can go back and check out yesterday's show. I went into that in depth. But when you get beyond that top five, I think there are some question marks. The bottom half of the Mets lineup. Is Jesse Winker going to bat sixth with that platoon where Starling Marte is going to face the lefties? Or could we see Francisco Alvarez as you go left, right, left, right, left? You have Alvarez hitting behind Nimmo, who might be batting fifth. Put Francisco Alvarez sixth. I think if he has a good season, that's where the Mets lineup should ultimately get to. And if Alvarez can break out, you are talking about 6 guys in your lineup that should clear 20 home runs. And really, if you focus on the top 4 guys, Lindor, Vientos, Soto, and Alonso, 4 guys that should clear 30 home runs. And I think between the 4 of them, they can average 35 home runs apiece because you have Vientos and Alonso both have 40 home run pop. Juan Soto just hit 40, a career high, and Lindor is going to get to his 30. So I think if you look at those guys, all of a sudden that's 140 home runs. Now, why am I so focused on home runs? Because if you look at what makes a great lineup in Major League Baseball, if you hit the ball out of the ballpark, you have a good lineup. And over the last 4 years, you go to 2021, 22, 23, 24. Every single year, the team that has the most home runs is top 3 in runs scored. Every single year. The Blue Jays, 2021, led the league in homers. They were 3rd in runs scored. 2022, the Yankees led the league in home runs. They were 2nd in runs scored. The Dodgers were 5th in homers, 1st in runs scored. 2023, the Braves led the league in both categories, home runs and runs scored. Dodgers were 2nd in home runs, 2nd in runs scored. Last year, you had the Yankees, the Orioles, and the Dodgers that led the league in that order in home runs. They were also top 3 in WRC plus. Again, weighted runs created plus, measuring hitters, or in this case, a team on a league average of 100. Top 3 teams in baseball in that all-encompassing offensive stat. Why? They hit home runs. The one team that was tied for 3rd was the Arizona Diamondbacks, and they led the league in runs scored. They had the best average in baseball, best on base percentage, but that was not their only recipe to success. They still hit the long ball, 5th in the league in home runs. When the Mets were great in 2022, they had a lineup that was a lot different. They were really just heavy on base percentage team that got on base a ton, hitting the clutch. I think they might have been 17th in home runs. Don't quote me on that. But they were not a top home run hitting team. And you know what happened to that team? They fell off. Their lineup showed its warts because when those long balls weren't coming and the on base and the clutch hitting wasn't there, you crumbled. So you need to have a lineup that can hit the home run. And when you look at what these teams lead the league, when they lead the league, how many home runs is it that they're getting to? Baseline's 230, high end 300 when the Braves did that in 2023, which was insane. But you're looking at a really good lineup gets to 230 home runs. A great lineup to borderline elite lineup gets over 250. That is the mark the Mets should be pushing for as a team. So how do we count up to 250 home runs? Well, I just mentioned your top 4 guys averaging 35 apiece. That brings you to 140. Now let's just imagine Francisco Alvarez, Brandon Nimmo, the 2 of them combined for 50. Can they give you 25 apiece? Nimmo has never gotten to 25 homers, but he's gotten to 24. Alvarez has gotten to 25 homers. I think he has the potential to hit 30. So now you look at where the Mets could be if all those things happen for the top 6 hitters in your lineup. They collectively could get to 190 homers. Now you're talking about the rest of your team, the other 7 spots on your roster going to position players. Can those guys account for 60 homers between them? I mean, last year you got 3 home runs from Tomas Nido. Okay, so when you really talk about it and you go through the other bats the Mets have, Jose Siri hit 18 last year. Jesse Winker hit 14. You got 7 apiece from Starling Marte and Tyrone Taylor. And Tyrone Taylor in the past has hit far more than that. Luis Torrens hit 3. So if you look at all those other guys I just mentioned, Siri, Winker, Taylor, and Marte, Torrens, if those 5 just match their total from last year, that's 49 home runs right there. Is there a key starter I'm forgetting about? Oh, yeah, Jeff McNeil. You say McNeil's not a home run bat. No, but he's hit 10 home runs at least the last 2 years, had 12 last season, 7 of them in 40 games after the All-Star break. I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility that McNeil could pop 15 for you. But even if he doesn't, it's not crazy to expect that the rest of the team outside of your top 6 hitters can get to 60 because you also have a guy like Brett Beatty who is going to get some run at some point. He has the potential to hit a couple home runs. Ronnie Mauricio could get some run at some point. He can hit some home runs. Luisangel Acuna had, 3 last year and a week and a half of legit playing time. I wouldn't expect him to homer at that rate, but could he hit a couple across the course of the season? Absolutely. So when you really look at it, this team can certainly get to that 250 home run mark that would make them an elite offense. Absolutely. The driving forces are obviously going to be your top 4 guys. It's going to be another 40 home run season potential from Juan Soto if he's contending for an MVP. It's Pete Alonso in a bounce back year, getting back over 40. And we know he has the ability to get north of 45. He had 46 home runs in 2023. Mark Vientos. Last year, you look at his home run pace, it would have been over 40. What he actually hit is 32 home runs between the regular season, 27, 5 in October. And then again, Brandon Nimmo, over 20 at 23 last season. If Alvarez is a 20 to 30 home run hitter, as opposed to just popping 11 like he did last year, it is going to change the complexion of your lineup. He is the bat that has, I think, the biggest range of outcomes from his floor to his ceiling. His floor is what we've seen the last couple of years. An above average offensive catcher because the position is weak, but basically an average hitter. 2, a guy that could do a Cal Raleigh impersonation. I really think he could. So we'll see. We'll see if Alvarez can get into that much power this year, if his mental approach is better, if he's less streaky. But he thinks the Mets have the best lineup in baseball, and that's because he holds a very high opinion of his teammates, but also himself. And he has the ability to be that X factor that takes the Mets from being very good to great. So we'll see if he does it. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. I know on yesterday's show, I sort of teased the idea of talking about a Padres trade. The more I'm diving into this, the less likely I really think it is that the Mets are going to swing for a Dylan Cease trade now. So we're going to start to focus more on spring training on this show. Pitchers and catchers are going to report on Wednesday officially. So Wednesday's show, I'm going to break down the top 5 pitchers who have the most to prove in spring training. We're going to do the same thing for hitters on Thursday, and then maybe we'll switch to some prospect-related content on Friday. All of that is assuming we don't get anything more newsworthy. We don't have a player saying something buzzworthy like Alvarez did today about the Mets having the best lineup in baseball. So all of that, of course, is pending to change. But I wanted to give you guys a heads up of where I am steering the content as we get into spring training. I appreciate all of you who have stayed tuned throughout this offseason. Really excited that baseball is back, and I hope you stay along with me throughout the entirety of the 2025 season. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Help us get closer to our next goal of 13,000 subscribers. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. You can follow me on social media at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.